Sorry, Blackies. Your first-class tickets aren't valid. It's like they were stolen or probably fraud. The gate agent's voice sliced through the boarding area at Chicago O'Hare, dripping with contempt as she stared down at 3 11-year-old black kids who were standing at her counter, tears streaming down their cheeks. The seats are for premium passengers, not unaccompanied children who probably have stolen first-class tickets. Her words hung in the air like poison, a stark reminder of how racism had wormed its way into every corner of society, even at airport gates where children were just trying to catch a flight. The triplets, Marcus, Maya, and Caleb, could hardly believe what they'd just heard. They were supposed to be boarding the plane, heading to first class like anyone else who'd paid for the service. But to the gate agent, their presence, their mere existence with those premium boarding passes in their small hands, had already been judged. They weren't supposed to be there. Not because they didn't belong, but because they were black. It wasn't the first time they'd been judged based on their skin color. There had been a teacher who assumed Marcus had cheated on his test because his score was too high. The store clerk who followed Maya through the aisles like she were going to steal something. The soccer coach told Caleb he should try basketball instead because that's what kids like him were better at. But this was different. The kids exchanged glances, the weight of the moment sinking in. They had every right to be there. Their father had purchased those tickets weeks ago, yet here they were, being singled out for something they couldn't change. Marcus, the oldest by 3 minutes, tried to find his voice. "Ma'am, our dad bought these tickets. We're flying to see our grandmother. She's in the hospital and we need to get to Atlanta today." The gate agent snatched the boarding passes from his trembling hand, holding them up to the light like she was inspecting counterfeit bills. "These have to be fake," she announced loud enough for everyone in the boarding area to hear. "There's no way your family can afford first-class tickets. Do you know how much these cost?" Around them, the world kept moving but also stood still. Passengers lined up behind the children, their eyes darting between their phones and the unfolding scene. Some had started recording, little red dots glowing on their screens, capturing every moment. A businessman in a gray suit shifted his briefcase from one hand to the other. A young woman in yoga pants whispered something to her companion. An elderly white couple shook their heads, but whether in sympathy or agreement with the gate agent, it was impossible to tell. What was clear was that nobody was stepping forward. Nobody was saying a word. They were all just watching, bearing witness to discrimination in real time, their silence as damning as the gate agent's accusations. Maya's eyes had filled with tears now, spilling over onto her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed to be crying in front of all these strangers. Caleb squeezed her hand, his own chin trembling as he fought to keep his composure. They had been taught to be respectful, to follow rules, and to never cause a scene. But what were they supposed to do when the adult in charge was the one being wrong? The gate agent tapped something into her computer, her lips pressed into a thin line of satisfaction. "I'm going to need to see identification from your parents," she said. "And I'm calling security. You 3 can wait right over there until we figure out where you really belong on this aircraft. If you believe no child should ever have to stand in an airport and be told they don't belong somewhere because of the color of their skin, keep watching. If you think racial discrimination at airline gates is something we left behind in the civil rights era, you need to see what happens next. And if you've ever been treated like you don't deserve the seat you paid for, the respect you've earned, the dignity that should be yours by right, drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from and what time you are watching right now. Also, we want to hear your story of how you were discriminated against. We're reading every single one. This story doesn't end the way you think. The man who walks through that terminal door in a few minutes will change everything, but not before these children suffer in ways that will break your heart. Hit that like button if you stand against racism, and subscribe because we're exposing these incidents of airline discrimination that happen every single day, caught on camera, witnessed by dozens, and too often swept under the rug. What happens next will shake you. But to understand how these 3 children ended up standing at that gate, humiliated and afraid, we need to go back 6 hours to that morning when everything still felt full of possibility. Marcus, Maya, and Caleb Thompson were 10 years old, 4th graders at Riverside Elementary in Houston, Texas. They were good kids, the kind teachers loved having in class. Marcus was the quiet one, always had his nose to a book about space or dinosaurs, and dreamed of being a scientist one day. Maya was the artist, carried a sketchbook everywhere, and could draw anything she saw with remarkable detail. Caleb was the athlete, played every sport the rec center offered, and had a collection of participation trophies lining his bedroom shelf. They were honor roll students, all three of them. They said please and thank you without being reminded. They did their homework at the kitchen table every night without complaint. They were being raised right, and everyone who knew them could see it. Their father, James Thompson, was doing his best as a single parent. Their mother had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier, and James had worked himself to exhaustion trying to fill the void she left behind. He worked in aviation, had started as a baggage handler right out of college, and climbed his way up over 20 years. The kids barely saw him for some weeks. He missed soccer games and parent-teacher conferences, came home after they were already asleep, and left before they woke up. But he loved them fiercely, and they knew it in the way he called them every night when he was traveling, in the way he never missed saying I love you, in the way he was saving everything he could to give them the life their mother would have wanted. That morning, James had woken them up extra early. He had made their favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes, even though it was a weekday and those were usually reserved for Sundays. The kids had stumbled into the kitchen, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, confused about why their alarms had gone off while it was still dark outside. Then they saw the suitcases by the door, small ones, already packed, and their father standing there with the biggest smile they had seen in months. We're going to see Grandma Rose, he had told them. She's been asking for you three, and I finally got some time off. We're flying out this morning. The children had erupted in excitement. Grandma Rose was their mother's mother, lived in Atlanta, and they only got to see her once or twice a year. She sent them cards for every holiday, called them on their birthdays, mailed them books and art supplies, and sports equipment. She was their connection to their mother, told them stories about what their mom was like when she was their age, showed them photos, kept her memory alive in ways their father sometimes struggled to do. The news that she had been sick, that she was in the hospital with heart problems, had been weighing on all of them for weeks. James had driven them to the airport himself, pointing out planes taking off as they merged onto the highway. He told them about the aircraft they would be flying on, a Boeing 737, explained how the wings worked, and why the engines were so loud. The kids had listened, asked questions, and felt safe in their father's knowledge and confidence. At the terminal, he had walked them all the way to security, hugged each of them tight, reminded them to stay together, to listen to the flight attendants, to call him the second they landed. You're in first class, he had told them, handing Marcus the boarding passes. It's a treat. You kids deserve it. There's more legroom, and they'll bring you snacks and drinks. It's going to be nice. Marcus had looked at the boarding passes with wide eyes. First class felt grown up, important, like something they had to earn. Dad, this must have cost so much, he had said. James had just smiled, ruffled his son's hair. You let me worry about that. You three just enjoy the flight and give Grandma Rose the biggest hugs from me, okay? Security had been fine. TSA agents had been patient with them, helped them put their backpacks on the conveyor belt, and told them good job when they walked through the metal detector without setting it off. The gate area had been crowded but manageable. They found seats together, pulled out the snacks their father had packed, played games on Maya's tablet, and counted down the minutes until boarding. When their group was called, they had lined up eagerly, boarding passes in hand, backpacks adjusted on their shoulders. Other passengers had smiled at them, these three identical faces full of nervous excitement. An older woman had told them how nice they looked. A businessman had let them go ahead of him in line. Everything had felt normal, easy, right? And then they had reached the gate agent. She had been standing there, this white woman in her 40s with her hair pulled back tight, her airline uniform pressed and perfect, her smile plastic and cold. She had looked at them approaching, these three black children with first-class boarding passes, and something had shifted in her expression. Something hard and suspicious had settled into her eyes. That was when the first question came, seemingly innocent on the surface. Are you three traveling alone? Marcus had nodded, polite like his father taught him. Yes, ma'am. We're going to Atlanta to see our grandmother. And these are your tickets? She had taken the boarding passes from his hand, studied them far longer than she had studied anyone else's. "Yes, ma'am. Our dad bought them for us." "Your dad?" She had said it like she didn't quite believe him. "And where is your dad now?" "He had to work. He couldn't come with us." The gate agent had looked at the passes again, then at her computer screen, then back at the children. There had been other passengers behind them now, waiting, watching. The agent had waved someone forward to scan other passengers' tickets while she continued questioning the triplets. "How old are you three?" "We're 10, Maya had offered helpfully. 10 years old, traveling alone, in first class." The way she said it made it sound like an accusation, like they had done something wrong just by existing in that space. She had typed something into her computer, frowned, typed some more. "These seats are very expensive. Are you sure your father purchased these?" That was when Marcus had felt the first flutter of real worry in his stomach. "Yes, ma'am. He flies with this airline all the time." "He works for an airline." "Which airline?" Marcus had hesitated, suddenly unsure if he should answer, if he was getting his father in trouble somehow. "A different one," he had admitted quietly. And that was when her professionalism had dropped completely, when the mask had slipped and revealed what had been underneath all along. "You people don't belong in first class." The words had hit them like a physical blow. Passengers had stopped moving. Phones had come out. The terrible moment had crystallized into something they would remember for the rest of their lives. And now here they stood, told to wait to the side, security being called, their boarding passes confiscated, their dignity stripped away in front of dozens of strangers who did nothing but watch and record and stay silent. The gate agent turned back to her computer, satisfaction evident in the set of her shoulders. She picked up the phone, her voice carrying across the boarding area. "Yes, I need security at gate 47. I have 3 minors with suspicious tickets who are refusing to cooperate." Marcus felt his heart drop into his stomach. They were in trouble now, real trouble, and their father was miles away with no idea what was happening to his children. The security call echoed through gate 47 like a death sentence. Marcus, Maya, and Caleb stood frozen where the gate agent had pointed, off to the side near a trash bin and a charging station, while other passengers continued boarding around them. Their backpacks felt suddenly heavy on their shoulders. Marcus kept glancing at the jetway entrance, watching people disappear down that tunnel toward the plane, toward Atlanta, toward their grandmother. Each person who boarded felt like another piece of their hope walking away. Maya was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it anymore. Caleb had gone completely silent, his jaw clenched tight the way their father's was when he was trying not to lose his temper. Marcus felt like he should do something, say something, but what could a 10-year-old possibly say that would make this right? They had their boarding passes. They had their identification cards from school in their backpacks. They had done everything their father told them to do. And still, here they were, being treated like criminals. Around them, the world kept moving. A man in a business suit walked past, glanced at them, then quickly looked away. A family with young kids hurried by, the mother pulling her children closer as if whatever trouble surrounded the triplets might be contagious. An elderly couple slowed down, the woman whispering something to her husband, both of them shaking their heads before continuing. The phones were still out, still recording, little red lights blinking like distant stars. But nobody was stopping. Nobody was asking what was wrong. Nobody was standing up for the 3 children who were clearly in distress. 2 airport security officers arrived within minutes, walking with that particular authority that comes with a uniform and a badge. They were both men, one older and white with gray in his hair, one younger and Latino with kind eyes that seemed uncertain about this whole situation. The gate agent immediately launched into her explanation, her voice taking on a professional tone that somehow made everything she was saying sound reasonable. These 3 minors presented suspicious boarding passes for first-class seats, she explained, gesturing at the children like they were evidence in a crime. They claimed their father purchased the tickets, but they're traveling alone, and they couldn't provide adequate verification. I need to ensure these tickets are legitimate before allowing them to board. The older security officer looked at the triplets, his expression unreadable. Can I see some identification? Marcus fumbled with his backpack, pulled out the small wallet his father had given him. Inside was his student ID card with his photo and his school's name. Maya and Caleb produced theirs as well, hands shaking as they held them out. The officer examined each one carefully, then looked at the boarding passes the gate agent had confiscated. "These boarding passes have your names on them," he said slowly. "Marcus, Maya, and Caleb Thompson. That matches your IDs." The gate agent wasn't satisfied. "But how do we know they didn't steal these tickets? How do we know their parents authorized this travel? They're 10 years old, flying first class alone. That's highly unusual. Highly unusual." The words hung in the air, and everyone understood what she really meant. It was highly unusual for black children to be in first class. That was the real problem. Not their age, not their identification, not anything they had actually done. Just their presence in a space she believed they didn't belong. The younger security officer crouched down to the children's eye level, his voice gentle. "Are you three okay? Can you tell me about your trip?" Marcus tried to find his voice. It came out thin and scared, nothing like the confident boy who had been so excited at breakfast that morning. "We're going to Atlanta to see our grandmother. She's sick. Our dad bought us these tickets and dropped us off at security. He gave us his phone number and told us to call when we land." "What's your dad's name?" "James Thompson. He works for an airline." "Not this one, a different one." The officer nodded, seemed to be processing this. Then the gate agent cut in again, her voice sharp with impatience. "Their flight is boarding right now. Either we verify these tickets are legitimate, or we remove them from the flight manifest. I have a schedule to keep." Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. If they missed this flight, they wouldn't make it to Atlanta today. Their grandmother was waiting for them. Their father had used his vacation days and spent money he probably didn't have on these tickets. And it would all be ruined because this woman had decided they didn't belong. "Please," Marcus said, hating how his voice cracked. "Please, we need to get to our grandmother. Our dad really did buy these tickets. You can call him. He gave me his number." The gate agent rolled her eyes, actually rolling them like this child's desperation was somehow annoying to her. "I don't have time to track down parents who send their children on flights without proper supervision." "They have proper supervision," the younger officer said quietly. "They're old enough to fly as unaccompanied minors, and they have identification. But do they have authorization?" That question hung there, impossible to answer. How were 3 children supposed to prove their father had permitted them when he wasn't there? What documentation existed that could satisfy this woman, who had already decided they were guilty of something? Maya was sobbing now, the kind of crying that shakes your whole body. Caleb had tears running down his face, too, though he was fighting them hard. Marcus felt his own eyes burning. They were going to miss their flight. They were going to disappoint their grandmother and their father. And worst of all, they were learning a lesson no child should have to learn at 10 years old. That no matter how good you are, how polite, how well-behaved, some people will look at your black skin and decide you're a problem that needs to be dealt with. The older security officer sighed, pulled out his radio. "Let me call this in, see what protocol says." The gate agent checked her watch with exaggerated impatience. "Boarding is almost complete. I need a decision now." Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone. His father had given it to him for emergencies, made him promise to keep it charged, and only use it when necessary. If this wasn't an emergency, nothing was. His hands shook as he unlocked it, pulled up his dad's contact. But before he could press call, the gate agent's hand shot out and snatched the phone from his grasp. "No personal devices right now," she snapped. "You 3 are under investigation." "That's my phone," Marcus said, his voice breaking completely now. "I was just going to call my dad. You'll get it back when we're done here." And just like that, their last connection to help was gone, held hostage by a woman who had appointed herself judge and jury over 3 children whose only crime was being black in first class. Have you ever watched someone in authority abuse their power over someone who couldn't fight back? Have you ever seen a child treated like a criminal for no reason except bias and prejudice? Drop a comment if this kind of racial profiling makes your blood boil. Tell us about a time you witnessed discrimination and wish you had spoken up. Because what happens next will show you exactly why these moments matter, why silence is complicity, and why these 3 children were about to endure something that would change them forever. The gate agent held Marcus's phone in her hand like it was evidence, proof of some crime she had already convicted them of in her mind. The boarding process continued behind her, the line thinning as passengers disappeared down the jetway. Marcus watched each person go, feeling their chances slipping away with every second that passed. The security officers were still there, the older one talking into his radio in a low voice, the younger one looking increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Then the gate agent's expression changed. She was looking at something on her computer screen, her lips pressed together in a thin line of what looked almost like vindication. She picked up the phone at her desk, pressed a button, and her voice came through the airport speakers, loud and clear and deliberately public. Attention passengers on Flight 2847 to Atlanta. We are experiencing a security delay due to suspicious activity at the gate. Boarding will resume momentarily once the situation is resolved. We apologize for the inconvenience. Marcus felt his face go hot. Everyone in the boarding area was looking at them now. Not just glancing, not just recording on their phones anymore. Full-on staring. The triplets were the suspicious activity. 3 10-year-old black children had somehow become a security threat. Maya was crying so hard she was hiccuping, struggling to breathe. Caleb had wrapped his arms around her, his own face wet with tears. Marcus wanted to comfort them, wanted to be strong like their father would be, but he was falling apart too. The gate agent turned to the security officers, her voice still loud enough to carry. I've contacted my supervisor. These children are claiming their father purchased first-class tickets for them, but I have serious doubts about the legitimacy of this transaction. First-class seats on this route cost over $900 each. That's nearly $3,000 for 3 unaccompanied minors. It doesn't add up. She said it like poverty was a crime. Like being black and having money for first-class tickets was impossible, suspicious, something that required investigation. The older security officer looked uncomfortable now, too, but he didn't contradict her. He just stood there, hand resting on his belt near his radio, waiting. A white woman in her 50s, who had been standing in line and was now seated in the waiting area, stood up. She walked over to the gate agent, her designer purse swinging from her shoulder, her voice dripping with indignation. Excuse me, but how much longer is this going to take? I have a very important meeting in Atlanta. I paid for a first-class seat specifically to ensure a smooth travel experience. This is completely unacceptable. The gate agent nodded sympathetically at her, a complete contrast to how she had treated the children. I understand your frustration, ma'am. We're working to resolve this as quickly as possible. There's been a ticketing irregularity. The woman glanced at the triplets, her nose wrinkling slightly. Well, perhaps they should have flown on an airline more suited to their situation. This is supposed to be a premium service. Her words landed like punches. Marcus felt something break inside him. They weren't just being accused of having fake tickets anymore. They were being told they didn't deserve to be there, even if the tickets were real. That first-class, premium service, the nice things in life were not meant for people who looked like them. His mother had tried to shield them from this kind of hatred. His father worked himself to exhaustion trying to give them opportunities. And here they were learning that none of it mattered, not really, not when people had already decided where they belonged. Marcus found his voice, and it came out raw and desperate and so much younger than his 10 years. We didn't do anything wrong. Our dad bought these tickets. He wanted us to be comfortable. Our grandma is sick and we need to see her. Please, we just want to see our grandma. The gate agent barely looked at him. You'll see your grandmother when we verify your tickets are legitimate and not fraudulent. Marcus asked, his voice breaking. How are we supposed to prove that? You took my phone. You won't let us call our dad. What are we supposed to do? That's not my problem. You should have thought about that before attempting to board with suspicious tickets. Caleb spoke up then, his voice small and confused and utterly heartbreaking. Why doesn't anyone like us? We've been good. We said please and thank you. We weren't loud or mean. Why is everyone being so mean to us? The question hung in the air like smoke. Passengers who had been watching, recording, whispering among themselves, suddenly found their phones very interesting. Shoes were studied. Magazines were opened. Eyes darted away from 3 children who were asking why the world was treating them this way. Nobody had an answer they were willing to say out loud. But everyone knew. The children were black, and they were in a space someone had decided they shouldn't occupy, and that was enough. Even the gate agent faltered for just a moment. Her professional mask slipped, and something almost human flickered across her face. But then it hardened again, and she turned back to her computer. "I'm simply following protocol." The older security officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I've contacted my supervisor as well. We need to make a decision here. Either we let these children board or we contact their guardian to pick them up. We can't just keep them here indefinitely." "I'm waiting for my supervisor," the gate agent repeated stubbornly. "Final boarding call for Flight 2847 to Atlanta. All remaining passengers, please board at this time." The announcement felt like a countdown to disaster. Marcus looked at the jetway, at the door that led to the plane, to Atlanta, to their grandmother. They were so close. They had made it through security, through the airport, all the way to the gate. And this one woman's suspicion, her bias, her determination to put them in their place was going to ruin everything. Maya looked up at Marcus with eyes that were red and swollen from crying. "Are we going to miss it? Are we going to miss seeing Grandma Rose?" Before Marcus could answer, before he could find words to comfort his sister when he had no comfort left for himself, the jetway door opened. Not from passengers boarding, but from someone coming out. Footsteps echoed on the tile floor, confident and quick and purposeful. Marcus turned, hoping desperately it was the gate agent's supervisor, someone who would listen, someone who would help. A man emerged from the jetway, still in the pilot's uniform, his face a mask of controlled fury as he took in the scene before him. 3 crying black children, security officers, phones recording, passengers watching. His eyes swept across the gate area and landed on the gate agent. "What exactly is going on here?" His voice cut through the chaos like a knife, sharp and commanding and full of authority that made everyone freeze. The gate agent's face went pale. The pilot stood there, his uniform crisp and official, his captain's stripes visible on his shoulders. The gate agent immediately straightened, relief flooding her face. She clearly assumed he was there to support her, to back up her authority, to help remove these problem children from her gate. "Captain, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice taking on a tone of professional solidarity. "These 3 minors presented questionable first-class boarding passes, and they've been uncooperative with security protocols. I've been trying to verify the legitimacy of their tickets, but they refuse to provide adequate documentation. Their behavior has been disruptive, and they're causing a significant delay to your flight." The pilot's expression didn't change. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned his attention to the children. When the children saw him, they wanted to scream "Dad." But he quickly held them, shut them and told them not to say any word so his identity won't be revealed. Then he looked at the security officers, at the passengers watching with their phones out, at the whole scene that had unfolded at his gate. "What exactly is happening here?" His voice was calm but carried weight, the kind of voice people listen to. The gate agent launched into her explanation again, her words tumbling out faster now. "These children claim their father purchased first-class tickets for them, but the transaction appears suspicious. First-class seats on this route are nearly $900 each. That's almost $3,000 total. They're 10 years old, traveling unaccompanied, and when I asked for verification, they became defensive and emotional. I was simply following proper security protocols." The pilot nodded slowly, taking it all in. The pilot listened without interrupting. Then he requested the children's boarding passes, pretending he didn't know them or that he purchased those tickets. Then the gate agent hesitated and handed them over to him. The pilot examined each one carefully, then looked at the children's student ID cards that were still in the security officer's hands. He compared names, checked the flight number, and studied the seat assignments as if he knew nothing about the children. Then he looked up at the gate area, at all the passengers who had witnessed everything. "I see several passengers have been recording this interaction." His eyes moved across the crowd. "Did anyone else witness what happened here?" There was a moment of heavy silence. Then an elderly white woman in a cardigan stood up from her seat in the waiting area. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I saw the whole thing. That gate agent has been questioning these children since they arrived. They showed her their boarding passes, and they answered all her questions politely. They didn't do anything disruptive. She's the one who made this into a scene. Another voice joined in, a man in a business suit who had been in line behind the Triplets. She accused them of having fake tickets before she even checked her computer. She made assumptions based on how they looked. They were perfectly polite, a younger woman added. They said yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am to everything. My kids don't even have manners that good. The voices overlapped now, passengers finally finding their courage to speak up, to confirm what everyone had seen but been too uncomfortable to address. The pilot listened to each one, his expression growing harder with every testimony. The gate agent's face was changing too, shifting from confident authority to something closer to panic. Now wait just a minute, she said, her voice rising. These passengers are exaggerating. They don't understand the full situation. I've been working for this airline for 12 years. I know policy. I know the procedure. This isn't about race. This is about following proper security protocols. These children were being evasive. Evasive? The young security officer spoke up for the first time, his voice hesitant but honest. Ma'am, with all due respect, they answered every question you asked them. They provided identification. The gate agent whirled on him. Are you questioning my judgment? I have the authority to deny boarding to any passenger I deem a security risk. That's airline policy. And do you deem 3 10-year-old children with valid boarding passes and identification a security risk? The pilot asked quietly. I deemed their tickets suspicious. Based on what evidence? Based on the cost and their age, and the fact that they were traveling alone. Plenty of unaccompanied minors fly first class. What made these 3 different? The gate agent's mouth opened and closed. She looked around at all the faces watching her, at the phones still recording, at the growing awareness that she had walked into a trap of her own making. I don't see color, she said defensively, her voice getting louder. I treat every passenger the same. If people want to make this about race, that's their problem. I was doing my job. This is what happens when you try to be thorough. Everyone wants to play the race card instead of following the rules. The white woman in the cardigan spoke up again, her voice sharp with anger. I've been flying for 40 years, and nobody has ever questioned my first-class ticket. Not once. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you don't see what we all saw. The gate agent's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. She turned to the pilot, her voice taking on a pleading edge. Captain, are you going to let these passengers disrespect me like this? I have authority here. I followed the procedure. I don't have to stand here and be accused of racism when I was simply doing my job. The pilot regarded her for a long moment. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. I've heard your position. Now I need to tell you something important. He paused, and the entire gate area seemed to hold its breath. I've been in the jetway since boarding began. I witnessed this entire interaction from the moment these children approached your desk. The gate agent's confidence faltered. You were watching? I was watching. And what I saw was 3 polite, well-behaved children being interrogated, humiliated, and detained because you made assumptions about who belonged in first class. The gate agent's voice rose higher, more desperate. Who are you to judge how I do my job? I don't answer to passengers. I respond to airline management and security protocols. The pilot reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to the gate agent without a word. She took it, her hand trembling slightly. Her eyes scanned the card once, then again. All the color drained from her face. Her hand dropped to her side, the card fluttering to the floor. No, she whispered. No, that's not possible. I didn't know. Nobody told me. This isn't fair. The pilot's expression didn't change. Didn't know what? What would you do if you were a passenger witnessing this discrimination? Would you speak up in the moment, or would you stay silent and feel guilty later? Would you record it on your phone, or would you intervene? Be honest with yourself. Drop your answer below. There's no judgment here. We're all learning how to be better bystanders, how to stand up when we see injustice happening right in front of us. Because what this pilot is about to reveal will change everything for these children, for this gate agent, and for everyone who watched this happen. The gate agent stared at the business card on the floor like it was a live grenade. Her hands were shaking. Her face had gone from red to white in the span of seconds. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The pilot stood there, waiting, his expression unreadable. The entire gate area had gone silent, everyone leaning forward, trying to understand what had just shifted the powers so dramatically. The pilot turned away from the gate agent and addressed the crowd that had gathered. His voice carried across the space, clear and authoritative. "My name is James Thompson. I'm a captain for this airline, and I've been flying for 22 years. But more importantly, I'm the father of these 3 children you've been watching get humiliated for the past 30 minutes. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the waiting area. Passengers turned to each other with wide eyes. Someone said, "Oh my God," loud enough to be heard over the sudden buzz of conversation. The gate agent made a small choking sound, her hand flying to her mouth. The security officers exchanged glances, the younger one's face flooding with relief, the older one's tightening with the realization of what had almost happened. Marcus, Maya, and Caleb clung to their dad tightly, still shocked at his sudden appearance. Their father was supposed to be at work. He wasn't supposed to be here. He turned back to the gate agent, and his voice took on a different quality. Still calm, still controlled, but with an edge that could cut glass. "Let me be very clear about what I witnessed from inside that jetway. I heard every word of this interaction from the moment my children approached your desk. I saw you question their right to have these tickets. I saw you interrogate them about money and affordability. I saw you confiscate their property when my son tried to call me. I saw you call security on 3 children who presented valid boarding passes and identification. I saw you announce the PA system, calling it a security threat. And I saw you do all of this while treating every white passenger who came through your line with courtesy and respect." The gate agent was shaking her head frantically. "Captain Thompson, sir, I didn't know they were your children. I swear I didn't know. If I had known, I never would have." He cut her off, his voice sharp now. "So, just stop. Do you hear yourself? You're saying if you had known who their father was, you would have treated them differently. You're admitting that your treatment of them had nothing to do with security protocols or ticket verification. You're admitting that you made judgments about 3 black children that you would never have made about white children in the same situation." "But I was just following procedure," she said weakly. "You weren't. Because if you were following procedure, you would have scanned their boarding passes, verified their names matched their identification, and welcomed them onto the aircraft. That's the procedure. What you did was profile them. You saw their skin color and you decided they didn't belong in first class. You saw black children with expensive tickets, and your first assumption was fraud. Not that their father worked hard and saved money to give them a nice experience. Not that they deserved to be there just as much as anyone else who paid for a ticket. Your first thought was that they must have done something wrong." The white woman in the cardigan spoke up again, her voice ringing with anger. "I told you I've been flying for 40 years. I'm a retired schoolteacher. I don't have money. I save all year to afford one nice trip. And not once, not ever, has anyone questioned my first-class ticket. Not once has anyone asked me how I could afford it. That's privilege. That's what these babies don't have and what I've always had without even knowing it." Other passengers murmured in agreement. The man in the business suit nodded. A younger black woman had tears running down her face. The phones were out again, but this time they weren't recording in secret. People were openly documenting what was happening, wanting proof of this moment of accountability. James continued, his eyes never leaving the gate agent's face. "The worst part isn't what you said. It's what you assumed. You looked at my children and saw a problem to be solved instead of passengers to be served. You saw their blackness before you saw their humanity. And that assumption, that prejudice, that reflex to treat black people as suspicious and unwelcome, that's not airline policy. That's racism. And it has absolutely no place at this airport, on these aircraft, or in this industry. Captain Thompson, please," the gate agent's voice was breaking now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please, I have a family. I need this job. I can't lose this job. You should have thought about that before you terrorized 3 children, James said, his voice cold now. You should have thought about that before you made my babies cry. You should have thought about that before you took my son's phone so he couldn't call for help. You should have thought about that before you announced to an entire airport that my children were a security threat. He turned to the older security officer. I want a full report filed about this incident. I want every video that was recorded by passengers. I want a complete review of this employee's history with the airline. And I want to know if there have been other complaints about her treatment of passengers of color that were ignored or dismissed. The officer nodded quickly. Yes, sir, Captain Thompson. We'll get that started immediately. James turned back to the gate agent. His voice was quieter now, but somehow more devastating. I'm not your supervisor. I can't fire you. But I can file a formal complaint. I can request an investigation. I can make sure this incident is documented and reviewed. And I can make sure that my children never, ever have to see your face again. The gate agent was sobbing openly now, her professional composure completely shattered. Other airline employees had gathered, watching in shocked silence. One of them, a young black woman in the same uniform, stepped forward hesitantly. Captain Thompson, I can take over the boarding process, she said quietly. If you'd like to board with your children. James looked at her, and his expression softened slightly. Thank you. I appreciate that. But first, I need to talk to my kids. He turned finally to his children, and the captain's mask cracked. His eyes filled with tears as he knelt and opened his arms. Marcus, Maya, and Caleb crashed into him, all 3 of them sobbing, holding on to their father like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just proven itself cruel and unjust. James wrapped his arms around them, his own tears falling into their hair. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. You did nothing wrong. You hear me? Nothing. You were perfect and brave, and I'm so proud of you. The entire gate area watched this moment, this father holding his children, this family reunited after trauma. And somewhere in that crowd of witnesses, people were learning what it meant to speak up, to stand up, to refuse to let discrimination happen in silence. But this story wasn't over yet. Because the consequences of what had happened at Gate 47 were only just beginning. The gate agent was escorted away by 2 other airline employees, her shoulders shaking with sobs, her career hanging by a thread. The replacement gate agent, the young black woman who had stepped forward, efficiently processed the remaining passengers, her movements professional but her eyes flickering occasionally toward James and his children. The boarding area still buzzed with conversation, passengers whispering to each other, phones being tucked away, the weight of what everyone had just witnessed settling over the space like morning fog. James stayed kneeling with his arms around his children for a long moment, letting them cry it out, letting them feel safe again. Then he pulled back slightly, keeping his hands on their shoulders, looking at each of their faces in turn. Marco, with his jaw still clenched trying to be strong. Maya, with tears still streaming down her flushed cheeks. Caleb was trembling like a leaf, his whole body betraying how scared he had been. I need you 3 to listen to me, James said quietly. What happened here was not your fault. Not even a little bit. You did everything right. You were polite and respectful. You followed every rule. You showed your tickets and your identification. Everything that woman accused you of, everything she put you through, that was about her prejudice, not about your behavior. Do you understand me? Marcus nodded slowly. But Dad, why did she hate us? We didn't do anything to her. James felt his heart crack a little more. Because some people see skin color before they see human beings, son. Some people have been taught, whether they realize it or not, that certain spaces aren't meant for people who look like us. That's not the truth, that's not right, but it's real. And until more people stand up against it, until more people refuse to stay silent when they see it happening, it's going to keep happening. Is that why nobody helped us? Caleb asked in a small voice. Because they didn't think we belonged there either? No, baby. James shook his head firmly. Most of those people knew what was happening was wrong. They felt uncomfortable. They wanted to help. But they were afraid. Afraid of making a scene, afraid of being wrong, afraid of getting involved. Fear keeps good people silent. And silence lets bad things continue. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But you weren't afraid, Daddy. You helped us. James smiled sadly. I wasn't afraid because you're my babies, and I would walk through fire for you. But also, I have power in this situation. I'm a pilot. I have authority. That makes it easier for me to speak up. The real heroes are the people who speak up even when they have no power, no authority, no protection. Like that grandmother who testified for you. She didn't have to do that. She chose to be brave. He stood up slowly, his knees protesting. The security officers were still there, waiting respectfully. James turned to the younger one. Thank you for listening to them, for treating them with kindness. That mattered. The officer nodded. I'm sorry it took so long, Captain. I should have acted faster. You acted when it counted. That's what matters. The replacement gate agent approached hesitantly. Captain Thompson, your flight is fully boarded. Would you and your children like to board now? James looked at his kids. You three ready? They nodded, picking up their backpacks. Marcus held out his hand. Can I have my phone back? James turned to the older security officer who still had it. The officer handed it over quickly, looking embarrassed. I apologize for that, son. That should never have been confiscated. The walk down the jetway felt surreal. Other passengers who had boarded earlier had clearly heard what happened or seen videos already being shared. People looked up as the Thompson family walked past, some faces sympathetic, some curious, some guilty. James kept his hand on Marcus's shoulder, guiding his children toward their first-class seats. A white woman in her 60s stopped them in the aisle. Her eyes were red, her voice shaky. I need to say something. I watched what happened to your children at the gate. I recorded it on my phone. But I didn't speak up. I didn't say a word. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't understand the full situation. But I knew. I knew it was wrong, and I stayed silent. I'm ashamed of myself. I'm so sorry. James studied her face, saw genuine remorse there. Then speak up next time, he said quietly. That's all any of us can do. Learn and do better next time. She nodded, tears spilling over. I will. I promise I will. As they settled into their seats, more passengers approached with similar apologies. A young man in his 20s, voice thick with emotion, said his grandmother had lived through segregation and he had never truly understood what she meant until watching those children be humiliated today. An older white man with tears in his eyes admitted he had seen similar things growing up in the South, had promised himself he would always speak up, and had failed that promise today. Each apology landed differently. Some felt performative, more about the apologizer's guilt than the children's pain. But some felt genuine, like seeds of change being planted in real time. James accepted them all with grace, but he noticed his children were quieter now, processing, trying to make sense of adults admitting they had failed them. The flight itself was smooth. The flight attendants were attentive without being overbearing, clearly briefed on what had happened. They brought the kids juice and snacks, asked if they needed anything, and gave them space to recover. James sat between Maya and the window, with Marcus and Caleb across the aisle, close enough to touch. But even with justice served, even with their father beside them, the trauma did not simply evaporate. Maya kept looking around nervously, as if expecting someone else to challenge their presence. Marcus was withdrawn, staring at his tablet without really seeing it. Caleb held his father's hand and would not let go. James recognized the signs. His children had just learned a hard lesson about the world, about how their skin color would mark them in ways they could not control. No amount of good behavior, no achievement, no politeness would shield them completely from prejudice. And while he had been there to protect them today, he would not always be there. That terrified him. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, James thought about all the other times this happened when no pilot father was watching, when no authority figure intervened, when discrimination occurred, and people just had to endure it and move on and carry that wound with them. His children were lucky today. But luck should not be required for dignity. The seatbelt sign turned off after landing, and passengers began gathering their belongings. James helped his kids with their backpacks, made sure they had everything. As they stood to exit, a flight attendant approached, a different one from the gate, an older black woman with kind eyes. Captain Thompson, she said quietly. The airline's customer service director is waiting at the gate. She'd like to speak with you and your children if you're willing. And she paused, her voice dropping even lower. Thank you for what you did back there. For standing up for your babies. A lot of us have wanted to speak up about that gate agent for a long time. Today, somebody finally did. James nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. How long has she been treating passengers like this? Years, the flight attendant admitted. But when it's your word against hers, when there's no proof, when passengers don't file formal complaints, nothing happens. Today was different. Today, there were witnesses. Today, there will be accountability. As they walked up the jetway toward the Atlanta terminal, toward their grandmother waiting somewhere in a hospital, toward whatever conversation awaited them with airline management, James put his arms around his children's shoulders. We're going to talk about something important when we get off this plane, he told them. Something about making sure what happened to you today doesn't happen to other kids. Are you three up for that? They nodded, tired but listening. And together, the Thompson family stepped off the aircraft and into whatever came next. Would you have apologized if you were one of those silent passengers? What would you say? Sometimes the hardest words are "I'm sorry, I didn't help." Sometimes admitting we failed someone takes more courage than we think we have. Drop your thoughts below. Tell us about a time you stayed silent and wished you hadn't, or a time you spoke up even though you were scared. Because learning to be better bystanders, learning to stand up for each other, that's how we change things. That's how we make sure the next child doesn't have to wait for their father to rescue them. The jetway doors opened to the Atlanta terminal, and James Thompson guided his children toward the gate area. Passengers who had been on the flight were still gathered, some waiting for connections, some lingering as if they were not quite ready to leave the story they had just witnessed. Several approached the family as they walked, offering quick words of support, some pressing business cards into James's hand with offers of legal help or media contacts. One woman hugged Maya gently and whispered something that made the little girl nod tearfully. At the gate, a tall black woman in a sharp navy suit was waiting, her airline identification badge identifying her as Patricia Williams, customer service director. She stepped forward as the Thompsons approached, her expression serious but warm. "Captain Thompson," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for waiting. I know you need to get to the hospital to see your mother, but if you have just a few minutes, I'd like to speak with you and your children." James shook her hand, then looked at his kids. "You three okay to talk for a bit? Grandma Rose is expecting us, but we have a little time." They nodded, exhausted but willing. Patricia led them to a quiet corner near the windows overlooking the tarmac, away from the flow of travelers. She pulled chairs into a small circle and sat down at eye level with the children, not towering over them from a position of authority. "First," she said, looking directly at Marcus, Maya, and Caleb, "I want to apologize to you three. What happened at that gate in Dallas should never happen to anyone, especially not to children. You did nothing wrong. You were treated unfairly, cruelly, and in a way that violated every value this airline claims to stand for. I am deeply, truly sorry." The children looked at each other uncertainly. Adults had been apologizing to them all flight, but this felt different. This woman had power. This woman could actually do something. Patricia turned to James. "Can I tell you why I flew down here personally instead of handling this over the phone?" James nodded, curious. "My grandmother was a domestic worker in Birmingham, Alabama," Patricia began, her voice taking on a different quality, something raw and personal. "She cleaned houses for white families her entire life. She told me stories about riding the bus, having to sit in the back, watching white people take the seats up front, even when she had been standing for an hour. She told me about water fountains labeled colored only, about restaurants that would not serve her, about being made to feel less than human just because of her skin color." She paused, looking out at the planes on the tarmac. "When I got this job, when I worked my way up to the director level, I made her a promise. I told her I would make sure no one ever felt that way on our aircraft, that our planes would be different. That dignity would not be conditional on skin color." Patricia turned back to James, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "But today showed me I haven't done enough. Policy memos are not enough. Diversity training videos are not enough. Having a few people of color in leadership is not enough. Because that gate agent went through all our training, signed all our policies, and still looked at 3 black children and saw a threat instead of passengers. James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't fail us today. You weren't even there. You can't be everywhere." "But that's exactly the point," Patricia said urgently. "I should not have to be there for people to be treated with dignity. The culture should be so strong, the accountability so clear, the expectations so embedded that discrimination becomes impossible, not just unlikely." Maya spoke up suddenly, her voice small but clear. "But what about all the times when nobody's dad is a pilot? What happens to those kids?" The question hung in the air, devastating in its simplicity. Patricia looked at this 10-year-old girl who had just articulated the core problem with perfect clarity. "You are exactly right," Patricia said softly. "That is the question that should keep me awake at night. What about everyone else? What about the passengers who experience this when there is no captain watching, no director flying down, no cameras recording?" James leaned forward. "You want to know how to fix this? Really fix it, not just put a Band-Aid on it?" "Please," Patricia said. "Tell me." James took a breath. "You cannot train away racism in a weekend seminar. You cannot fix centuries of prejudice with a PowerPoint presentation. What you can do is change the systems. Hire people who have experienced discrimination, who understand it in their bones, who will spot it immediately because they have lived it. Create reporting structures where speaking up is rewarded instead of punished, where victims are believed the first time, not the 10th. Make consequences actually mean something. Not paid administrative leave. Not transfers to different routes. Real consequences that show everyone this behavior will end your career." Patricia was nodding, taking notes on her phone. "What else?" The silence, James said, his voice hardening. "That is what scared me most today. Not the gate agent. We will always have people like her. What terrified me was watching dozens of passengers see my children being humiliated and doing nothing. Recording it on their phones but not speaking up. Watching it was like entertainment instead of injustice happening in real time." Caleb spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. "Why didn't anyone help us until you came, Dad? Were they scared of us too?" James pulled his son close. "They were not scared of you, buddy. They were uncomfortable. They were not sure if it was their place to intervene. They were afraid of making it worse or being wrong or causing a scene. Fear keeps good people silent, and silence allows bad things to continue." Patricia looked at Caleb with something like pain in her expression. "Your father is right. And that is something we need to address too. Not just training our employees, but teaching passengers that they have a responsibility to speak up. That silence is complicity. That being a bystander is a choice, and it is the wrong choice." Marcus had been quiet, processing everything. Now he looked up at Patricia. "What's going to happen to that lady? The one who was meant for us?" Patricia met his eyes steadily. "She has been suspended pending a full investigation. We are reviewing her employment history, looking at past complaints, interviewing other employees and passengers. Based on what I have seen and heard already, I do not believe she will be working for this airline again." "Good," Marcus said simply. "She shouldn't get to do that to other kids." "You are right," Patricia agreed. "She should not. And if we do our jobs correctly, she will not." She turned back to James. "Here is what I am committing to, starting tomorrow morning. Independent review of every discrimination complaint filed in the past 5 years to see what we missed, what we dismissed, and what we swept under the rug. Mandatory bystander intervention training for all employees and voluntary training offered to frequent flyers. A direct reporting hotline where passengers who witness discrimination can report it straight to my office, bypassing local management who might be incentivized to protect their staff. Quarterly flights where executives fly economy, unannounced, to see what really happens when no one knows we are watching." She paused. "And most importantly, I'm going to push hard for more people who look like you and me in senior leadership positions. Because the people making decisions about policy and culture need to be people who understand what it feels like to be profiled, discriminated against, and treated as less than. We need that perspective at the table where decisions get made." James nodded slowly. "That is a good start. A real start, not just words." Patricia smiled sadly. I cannot undo what happened to your children today. But I can make damn sure it means something. That their pain leads to change. That the next family does not have to go through this. James looked at his 3 children, sitting there exhausted and traumatized but listening to every word. He reached out and took Marcus's hand, then Maya's, then Caleb's. You 3 hearing this? This is how change happens. Not just because something bad happened, but because people decide to do something about it afterward. Your pain today might protect other kids tomorrow. That does not make it okay, but it makes it matter. Patricia stood up, smoothing her suit. I will not take up any more of your time. Your mother is waiting for you. But Captain Thompson, I would like to stay in touch. I would like your input as we implement these changes. And she looked at the children. I would like your input too, if you are willing. Sometimes, the people who have lived through something understand it better than anyone else. Marcus, Maya, and Caleb looked at each other, having a silent conversation the way siblings do. Then Marcus nodded. We can help. So it doesn't happen to other kids. Patricia's professional composure cracked slightly. Thank you, truly. As she walked away, James pulled his children close. You 3 ready to go see Grandma Rose? She is going to want to hear about your adventure. Dad, Maya said quietly. Can we tell her what happened? The real story? James looked down at his daughter. Yeah, baby girl. We can tell her the real story. She needs to hear it. The whole world needs to hear it. And together, the Thompson family gathered their things and headed toward the hospital, carrying with them a story about discrimination and dignity, about silence and speaking up, about the long road toward justice that stretched behind them and still ahead. The Thompson family walked through the Atlanta terminal, passing coffee shops and newsstands, and gates where other families were beginning their own journeys. James had his arm around Maya's shoulders. Marcus walked beside him, occasionally glancing up at his father like he was seeing him differently now, understanding something new about what it meant to be a black man with authority in spaces that did not always welcome black people. Caleb held his father's hand and had not let go since they left the gate. Outside, they caught a taxi to Grady Memorial Hospital. The ride was quiet, all of them processing the morning in their own ways. When they arrived, Grandma Rose was awake and waiting, propped up in her hospital bed with monitors beeping softly around her. Her face lit up when she saw them, though James could see how much thinner she had gotten, how the illness had aged her. My babies, she said, opening her arms. Come here and let me see you. The triplets climbed carefully onto her bed, mindful of the 4 lines and wires. They hugged her gently, breathing in her familiar smell of cocoa butter and lavender. James stood back, watching, feeling the weight of the morning finally catching up with him. Grandma Rose looked at her son over the children's heads. Her eyes narrowed slightly, reading something in his expression. What happened? James hesitated. The kids are okay, Mama. We're all okay. But we had a situation at the airport. What kind of situation? And so they told her. The kids took turns explaining what happened, their voices overlapping, correcting each other's details, reliving the fear and confusion and hurt. Grandma Rose listened without interrupting, her hand stroking Maya's hair, her expression growing harder with each detail. When they got to the part about their father appearing from the jetway, she looked at James with something between pride and sorrow. You had to save your own children from racism at an airport gate in 2025, she said quietly. James, I thought we had come further than this. So did I, Mama. So did I. Grandma Rose was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at her grandchildren. You 3 listen to me. What happened to you today was wrong. Evil. Unacceptable. But it was not new. Your great-grandmother, my grandmother, could not sit at lunch counters. Could not use the same bathrooms as white folks. Could not drink from the same water fountains. She was beaten for trying to register to vote. Your great-grandmother marched with Dr. King, had dogs sicked on her, and was arrested for sitting in the front of a bus. I marched too back in the 60s. I integrated schools. I sat at lunch counters while people poured food on my head and called me names I will not repeat. I did all of that so my children and grandchildren would not have to. So you 3 could fly first class without being questioned. So you could exist in any space you paid for without someone deciding you did not belong. She paused, her voice thickening with emotion. And today you learned that the fight is not over, That we have made progress, yes, but we have not reached the finish line. Some people still look at your beautiful black faces and see a problem instead of a blessing. And that breaks my heart. Marcus spoke up quietly. But Dad fixed it, Grandma. He made them apologize. He got that lady in trouble. Grandma Rose nodded. Your daddy did good. I am proud of him. But baby, what happens the next time when your daddy is not there? What happens to the kids whose parents do not have power, do not have authority, cannot make people listen? That is what the lady at the airport said, Maya offered. She said we were lucky. You were lucky, Grandma Rose agreed. But luck should not be required for dignity. Justice should not depend on who your father is. So what do we do? Caleb asked. How do we make it better? Grandma Rose looked at each of her grandchildren in turn. You speak up, boys. Even when your voice shakes. Even when you are scared. Even when people tell you that you are being too sensitive or making it about race or causing trouble. You speak the truth about what you see and what you experience. You do not let anyone make you doubt what you know happened. And when you see it happening to someone else, you speak up for them too. You do not pull out your phone to record it for social media. You do not stay silent because it is uncomfortable or not your problem. You open your mouth and you say this is wrong. Because silence is how this continues. Silence is how good people become complicit in evil. The children nodded solemnly. James felt his throat tighten watching his mother pass this knowledge to his children, the same knowledge that had been passed down through generations of their family. How to survive. How to resist. How to maintain dignity in the face of dehumanization. 3 months later, Marcus, Maya, and Caleb were back home in Houston. The video of what happened at the gate had gone viral, was watched millions of times, shared across social media platforms, and discussed on news programs. The gate agent had been fired. The airline had implemented new policies, new training, and new accountability measures. Patricia Williams had kept her promises, and the Thompson children had participated in focus groups, shared their story at company meetings, and helped design the bystander intervention training. But the real change was harder to measure. It was in the conversations happening in living rooms and break rooms and classrooms. It was the passengers who now spoke up when they saw discrimination instead of staying silent. It was the gate agents and flight attendants who thought twice before making assumptions based on skin color. It was slow, incomplete, imperfect. But it was something. One evening, Maya was doing homework at the kitchen table while James made dinner. She looked up from her math worksheet. Dad, are you scared to fly anymore? James turned from the stove, considering his answer. He could lie, could tell her everything was fine now, could protect her from the truth that the world was still a dangerous place for Black people. But his mother had taught him better than that. A little bit, he admitted. But being scared and doing it anyway? That is called courage. Your great-grandmother was scared when she tried to vote. Grandma Rose was scared when she marched for civil rights. I was scared speaking up for you three that day, scared of what it would cost me, scared of making it worse. You will be scared sometimes too. But here is what I want you to remember. You belong everywhere. On airplanes, in first class, in boardrooms, in universities, in any space you have earned the right to occupy. And when someone tries to make you feel like you do not belong, you speak up, even if your voice shakes, especially if your voice shakes. And if nobody listens? Maya asked quietly. Then you speak louder. And you find people who will listen. You find your allies, your witnesses, your people who will stand with you. And you never, ever let anyone convince you that your dignity is negotiable. Maya nodded, processing this. Then she went back to her homework. James watched her for a moment, this brave little girl who had been forced to grow up too fast, to learn lessons about racism and resistance that no 10-year-old should have to learn. But she was strong. They all were. They came from a long line of survivors. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think racial discrimination and prejudice can end? I want your honest answer. Not what you think you should say, but what you actually believe. Can we reach a point where skin color truly does not determine how you are treated, where you are welcomed, whether you are seen as human? What do you think needs to happen to stop this? More laws? Better training programs? Personal accountability? Cultural shift? Is it about policy changes or heart changes? Tell us what you think the path forward looks like. Here is a harder question. Do you think serving justice, firing that gate agent, and changing airline policies is enough to end discrimination? Or is something deeper required? Can you legislate away bias? Can you train away prejudice? Or does real change require something more fundamental, something that happens in families and communities and individual hearts? And here is the hardest question of all. Have you ever stayed silent when you witnessed discrimination? Maybe you saw someone being followed in a store, questioned unnecessarily, and treated differently because of their race. What stopped you from speaking up? Was it fear of confrontation? Uncertainty about whether you were reading the situation correctly? Worry about making things worse? And what would it take for you to speak up next time? What would give you the courage to say this is wrong, to stand with the person being targeted, to refuse to let injustice happen in your presence? Drop your answers in the comments. I am reading every single one. No judgment here. Just an honest conversation about where we are, where we need to go, and how we get there together. If you believe racism should become a thing of the past in our country and world, if you want to be like James Thompson, someone who speaks truth even when it is terrifying, someone who turns pain into purpose, someone who teaches the next generation how to fight for dignity. If you want to be like those passengers who finally found their voices and spoke up, who apologized for their silence and committed to doing better, then like this video. Subscribe to Hyper Racism channel. Share this story so more people can see it, learn from it, and be challenged by it. Because we are not just telling stories here. We are documenting a movement. We are creating a record that says we saw, we witnessed, and we refused to stay silent. Every share is an act of resistance. Every comment is a testimony. Every subscription says this matters, these stories matter, these lives matter. The gate agent who discriminated against those children thought she could get away with it because she had gotten away with it before. Because other passengers had stayed silent. Because the culture allowed it. But when people spoke up, when witnesses testified, when authority held her accountable, everything changed. You have that power too. The power to speak up. The power to be a witness instead of a bystander. The power to create a culture where discrimination cannot survive. Use it. Discrimination thrives in silence. Your voice matters. Speak up.